So yesterday I was watching YouTube, welcome back, and there was a police officer who was on trial, right? Because the guy pressed charges against him because he wasn't under the influence. And in certain states and laws, there's different guidelines.
Oh, I think I saw that.
So the attorney was very sharp. He must have been a DUI specialist. So the moral to the story is the guy was peeing on an abandoned building. The cop drove by, seen him do that, went up the street, circled back around, saw the guy get in his car, and then proceed onto the road. And then the cop circled behind him and instantly pulled him over. This is what the police officer said while he was on trial, sitting in the I'll call it the dunce chair, right? Okay, the dunce chair. So the prosecutor was talking to him, and then he said, okay, and then cross-examination was the defendant, which is the guy who got the DUI. So, and he said, well, tell us how the whole story went down. And then the cop is reading from his police report. So then the good, I'm going to say the better attorney, went up to the judge and said, this guy's reading from his ticket that he wrote for this guy. He goes, it's to the best of your knowledge law, not scripted, is what he's saying. So they made him take it back and said if he needed to refer to it, that they would give it back to him, that he can't read from it, because I clearly seen that he pulled it out of his pocket and started reading what was going on.
Yeah, no, that's definitely not going to help you.
So they got him there, and then the guy was like, so you saw him urinating on the thing, not a big deal, right? You turn back around, you see him get in this car, and then he gets onto the road, he makes it right with his turn signal on, and then you instantly pull him over. So like that fast, within seconds he pulled him over. He didn't get to evaluate him driving for a long period of time to say that he was under the influence. So his intentions were to pull him over and talk to him about urinating in public. Not the end of the world, right? If it's just a cop and you, is it really a big deal? It's not really public, if there's no one around. So he says, yes, I pulled him over instantly. He goes, did he use his turn signal? He said, yes. Did he speed? No. Did he delay pulling us over? No. He instantly pulled over. He said, I knocked on his window, asked him for his credentials, and he said I was going to talk to him about urinating, and as I smelled alcohol on his breath. So then he goes, so is that why you think that he's under the influence because you smell alcohol on his breath? He said, yes, is what he says, I think. What do you want me to do?
Has a clogged catalytic converter. She said there's the manifold, and there's a flex, and there's that cat.
All
I was told that cat is clogged.
Okay.
Stop it. Stop it. I'm sick. Stop.
Okay. So, hold on. This is going to stay with us. So, he tells the guy to immediately get out of the car as soon as he smells alcohol on him, and then starts administering sobriety tests. One is the follow the pen thing, right? And he says, well, the guy was moving his head. Okay. Was he falling over? He goes, and he said his speech was a little slurred. Like, I guess the guy's Spanish or Cuban or something like that, right? He's 65 years old. This is the most important part. He's 65 years old. So, and then he goes, all right, well, we moved on to the next test, which is stand on one foot with your 6 inches off the ground, right? Don't lean on anything. Now, he's completely sober, right? 6 inches off the ground, higher, 6s. Yep, 6 inches. And then he's 65. He goes, so the guy had to put his arms up, but he didn't drop his foot. He didn't step forward, didn't do anything. So at that point, he considered him, he was under the influence of alcohol and driving. And then he wanted to take him downtown. He refused the blow thing on scene. And then when he got into the police department, he refused a breathalyzer. So the attorney's tearing this cop up. He says, well, what is your training, right? Your training is, what are the signs that tell you that there's someone under the influence? Per your training that they teach you. He said, this doesn't mean that he's under the influence if his head moves. If he falls over, if he's wobbling, things of that nature are your telltales. He goes, there are only 3. And you only said 1 with the pen test. He goes, and then you did them to the toe test, right? And I said, well, if I do it myself, I'm completely sober and my ankle's twitching, and I haven't had drinking once, right? So I would fail the sobriety test based on some uneducated police officer's evaluation of me. Even if I didn't smell like alcohol, I could be drunk. He doesn't know. And you can refuse the breathalyzer. So he said, so based on your training, you have one condition out of 3 in the first test, right? And then the next one was that he put his arms up and he didn't put his foot down. He pointed the toes right, and he tried to regain his balance. And that was enough for you to arrest him for a DUI charge. So he said, yes, based on my experience, not what the law is. So the law is what his training taught him. And he said, based on his experience is why he arrested him. They don't arrest you for experience. They arrest you for the law. So now the cop's unlawful. So that was like tearing up. He was like, so the next test, this test here, there's 8 signs that you're under the influence. Bloodshot eyes, flustered skin, slurred speech, falling over, feet touching the ground. So this guy went over all the laws that the scientists had put in place.
Yeah, what if you were having a seizure?
For DUI charges. Hold on. And one of those criteria is do not sobriety test anyone who's 65 years or older. He was 65 years old. The cop should never even administer any DUI tests. 0. So he wasn't swerving. He wasn't doing this. He wasn't doing that. Based on his experience is what he's telling the judge in the courtroom, that this guy was under the influence because everyone acts different, right? Everyone's different under the influence. Well, then this test, put your foot out 6 inches, is inconclusive for even sober people, depending on equilibrium. Are they smoked up on marijuana? Did they eat a lot of yeast? It's making their stomach produce yeast, right? Yeast turns into alcohol. If you're yeasty, you have yeast infection, your breath could smell like alcohol. It's very possible. So they just kept pounding this guy, and he just sat there and he's like, well, I don't know the 8 signs. He goes, it's your job. It's your training. You're supposed to know the 8 signs in the second test. Couldn't recite any of them. 14 years on the force. Then he said, he didn't know that, he didn't even remember that you shouldn't do a 65-year-old person. That was another thing. So they basically just shredded him on the stand, and then they declared a mistrial and said if they wanted to take it up with another court system that they could. But just to go to show, like, if you're sober, right, you could fail any one of those tests. And what he's saying, well, guys could drink, and be drunk and act perfectly normal. It is not you to interpret the law in any other different way than it's written. That's it. Then they said when he pulled them over, he's like, car 54, where are you? I'm doing a traffic stop. So he calls it in right before he pulls them over, and then the clerk documents a time. Officer so-and-so is doing this stop right at this time. Boom. Then like a second later, they dispatched another officer to the scene. He says there was no other officer on the scene at all. And he goes, well, here's the dispatch report that we have that says there was another officer on the scene. And you're saying there was no other officer on the scene. And he goes, isn't it your job to document all this? Officer on the scene, flustered skin, bloodshot eyes, slurred speech. He said, yes. He goes, because this is how we know what's going on. And you didn't do that. So he didn't fill out the paperwork right. He didn't know there was another officer on the scene. So at the end they said, well, how did the car get released back to his wife? Because she was in the car. He goes, did you talk to her? He goes, well, I think I talked to her. He goes, well, where did the car go? He goes, well, I took him to jail, so I guess someone released the car to my... He goes, I don't remember. The other officer that was on the scene released the car to the fucking lady who was drove the car away. Like, completely just smeared this guy all over. But I wanted to do this video because stand on the sobriety test like this. And don't lean on anything. 6 inches off the ground, toe up, right? So your ankle's wiggling.
Yeah.
And your eyes are bloodshot because you have allergies.
Yeah.
And you smell like blood.
Oh, can you stop, man? All right, here, I gotta go to the gynecologist.
You just killed somebody. There's a murder scene going on.